Good evening, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. Welcome to tonight's virtual conversation. Is this the beginning or the end? An exploration of starting over, featuring authors Ben Markovits and Jessica Brilliant Keener, moderated by series moderator Stephanie Butnick. Welcome back to Unpacking the Book 2026 season. My name is Jenna Weiss. I'm the Associate Director of Public Programs at the Jewish Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's conversation, co-presented by the Jewish Museum, Jewish Book Council, and Golda, your Jewish lifestyle guide. If this is your first time attending an Unpacking the Book event, welcome. We hope you'll join us for the next two programs, which will be held live in person at the Jewish Museum this spring, coming up in April and May. And if you come early for those events, you can visit our exhibition galleries, including two exhibitions, Paul Klee, Other Possible Worlds, which opens this Friday, and Joan Semmel, In the Flesh, which is on view through May 31st. And for those of you tuning in from further away, recordings of those programs, as well as our entire back catalog of Unpacking the Book, Jewish Writers in Conversation, is available to watch on Jewish Book Council's YouTube page. For those visiting the museum, we also offer virtual tours or in-person tours for groups of any size, so come and bring your book club, tickets, and more information at thejewishmuseum.org/visit. During tonight's talk, closed captioning is available for those who wish to use it. Simply click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen to watch the event with captions turned on. Now, before we begin, I'd like to welcome Miri Pomerantz-Dauber, Associate Director of Jewish Book Council, to share a little bit more about tonight's program.
Thank you so much, Jenna. I'm so pleased to be able to welcome you all on behalf of Jewish Book Council to the first Unpacking the Book conversation of our 12th season. We're so thrilled to present Unpacking the Book in partnership with the Jewish Museum and with Golda, your Jewish lifestyle guide. Each program we've offered in the series brings together authors who approach similar subject matter through their own unique lens. Tonight, we'll be diving into a fascinating and meaningful conversation with Ben, Jessica, and Stephanie about how we find and center ourselves in the midst of major life changes that turn the world upside down, and what we learn about ourselves when everything we thought we know changes in a minute. Tonight's conversation is meaningful addition to our work at Jewish Book Council of educating, enriching, and strengthening the community through Jewish literature. Cultivating a thriving Jewish literary landscape is a priority for us, as reflected in our variety of programs, including our newest one, New Reads, which is a curated bi-monthly book subscription series that has already reached nearly 2,000 subscribers. And we're so proud that through our efforts this past year, we were able to share the world of Jewish literature with a record number of readers, nearly 900,000. To learn more about our efforts, to find reviews, essays, and our book club resources, to subscribe to New Reads or learn about author tours and our literary awards, including the upcoming celebration of the 75th Annual National Jewish Book Awards, I hope you will visit our website and even consider becoming a member to support our work that uplifts and celebrates Jewish voices and stories. Before I pass things over to Stephanie, I'd like to very quickly thank the Jewish Museum, and specifically Jenna Weiss, and our amazing media sponsor, Golda. A very special thank you as well to Evie Sapphire Bernstein, Jewish Book Council's Program Director, for managing all of the ins and outs of this program. And I'm so especially grateful to JBC's Board of Directors for their continued support of Jewish literature, ideas, and conversation. We'd also like to invite you to the second Unpacking the Book event series that Jenna mentioned on Wednesday, April 15th at 7 p.m. in person at the Jewish Museum, entitled Searching for a Home in Exile, with authors Daniela Gerson of the book The Wanderers and Nicholas Lemon, the book Returning. You can click on the link in the chat to register. Finally, you will have the opportunity to purchase both of our panelists' books tonight, which is an important part of supporting the authors in our community. The links will be posted in the chat. And now I'd like to introduce you to Stephanie. Stephanie Butnick, who has been moderating this series for many years, is the founder of the Jewish lifestyle newsletter Golda. She previously hosted the hit tablet podcast Unorthodox and co-authored the newest Jewish encyclopedia, From Abraham to Zabars and Everything in Between. She lives in New York City with her husband and two daughters. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us tonight, and please enjoy the evening. And now to Stephanie.
Thank you, Miri and Jenna. I'm so excited to be here. Of those 12 seasons, I'm really pleased to say that I've moderated the past eight. So like hoping to keep things going, no pressure on us tonight. But it's so nice to be here. It's such an amazing partnership with the Jewish Museum and the Jewish Book Council. I'm the founder of Golda, and I'm thrilled to be for Golda to be the media sponsor. And I want to welcome Ben Markovits and Jessica Brilliant Keener to the screen with me.
Hi, thanks for having me on. This is my cheapest
So
Glad to be
flights
here.
from London to New York I've ever done.
it's amazing. And Jessica, where are you coming to us from?
Brookline, Massachusetts, where it's actually 60 degrees to get today. Balmy.
That's incredible. Don't move. Don't go anywhere because you don't want that weather to change. We have an amazing conversation here tonight. What do you do when your life takes a 180-degree turn and suddenly everything you thought you don't? Our two authors tonight, Ben Markovits and Jessica Brilliant Keener, both have new books that delve into major life changes, finding yourself when your world turns around, and what we learn about ourselves when everything we thought we knew changes in a moment. And everything you thought you knew, everyone on this panel, everyone on this Zoom, is going to change tonight too. So if you have questions along the way, pop them into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be getting to as many of them as we can later on tonight. So can I tell the two of you who you are? Would you like that?
That'd be great. Go ahead.
I've forgotten, so it'll be useful for me.
This is good because I'm starting with you, Ben. Ben Markovits is the author of 12 novels, most recently, The Rest of Our Lives, which was the finalist for the Booker Prize. His previous novels include Fathers and Daughters, You Don't Have to Live Like This, and The Sidekick, which I loved. He has published essays, stories, poetry, and reviews in The Guardian, Granta, The Paris Review, The New York Times, among others. He lives in London, as we just heard, and teaches creative writing at Royal Holloway University of London. That sounds very fancy. And Jessica Brilliant Keener, coming to us from Brookline, Massachusetts. Her best-selling debut novel, Night Swim, was followed by her collection of award-winning stories, Women in Bed. Her second novel, Strangers in Budapest, was an Indie Next Pick, a Southern Independent Bookseller Association bestseller, and a Best New Book selection by Entertainment Weekly. Her newest book is Evening Begins the Day. And I don't, so welcome to you both officially.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think I'm giving anything away here, since I think in the first line of both of your books, we find out that our protagonist's spouse is having some kind of affair.
Yeah.
How do you describe what these books are? I mean, you put it out there on the front page. There's obviously a lot that we get to, but I would love to hear like sort of how the two of you describe this book, and what we're going to sort of be getting into later on tonight.
So, Jessica, your book is out next week, is that right?
Next week. Yes. Next
So
Tuesday.
you haven't had to over describe it yet.
No, I'm still practicing.
Yeah.
My book it deals with two families in crisis, but the novel launches with a marital infidelity with an emotional affair, which is slightly different than your traditional sexual affair. And I was interested in exploring that and really the sense of betrayal. I think betrayal is really at the core of when you're talking about infidelity. And I was very interested in betrayal and how that showed up also with the other characters in my book. There are different kinds of betrayals going on. I have the other families dealing with an at-risk teenager, and the daughter's feeling betrayed by the mother's feeling betrayed by the daughter. I have an educator who's a high school principal near the end of his sort of career. He's sort of feeling betrayed by life. He's a bit, embittered. He's had his own tragedy to deal with, a family tragedy. So the marital emotional affair launches the story for me, but it does start to branch out into other forms of trouble.
I guess I'll talk about affairs now. So I have my book came out in England about a year ago, and so I have described it in lots of different ways. And I was trying to think before coming on tonight how many of the ways I've described it actually seem true to me anymore, and if I can remember. So one of the ways I described it is the book is about what happens to a marriage after the kids leave home, and you've got to think about what to do with the rest of your life. The other way I described it was it's about a guy whose wife had an affair when the kids were small. And he makes a kind of deal with himself that when the youngest leaves home, he can walk out on the marriage. I hesitate to describe it that way because that makes it sound a little bit more like a contract he signs with himself, a little bit more psychotic than it really was. It's just he's trying to get through a bad time, and he promises himself that he can revisit this question later on, and then later on happens. But he's kind of surprised when it gets there. And the book opens when he drops his daughter at university.
And both of these characters, Jessica, in your novel, I'm thinking of Rachel, who's sort of one half of the two, one of the two families, and then obviously Ben, our protagonist in your book. They do go on journeys. Tim is driving across the country, dropping his kid off, and Rachel is going on a more metaphysical journey through counting the Omer. So I guess, I mean, we can jump straight into the Jewish stuff. I don't know if it's too early for this Jewish Book Council event. Ben, you have the distinct, you mentioned the Jewish Book Council in your book, which I love, which is like a real good name drop. So we'll get to that.
Really?
But Jessica, you bring something really, really interesting in, which is this idea of counting the Omer, which I think a lot of Jews actually don't even really know about, but it's sort of, you know, Rachel goes to synagogue right after she finds out. She sort of goes on this unexpected spiritual journey. The other family joins her. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about how the Jewish calendar sort of comes into play as sort of a way of propelling the plot, the storyline forward, and where that comes from in your own inspiration.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me as well because I had never heard of the Counting the Omer until I was writing this book, and I would say that was about 6 years ago. I mean, I'm Jewish, and I went to whatever religious school every week when I was growing up, and I was confirmed. I went to Hebrew school for a few years, but after that, I didn't really go to synagogue too often. But I had never, I just had no idea it existed. But what I was writing a draft of my novel, and I really was searching for some kind of spiritual element to my story. I mean, I do like to delve into the psychological, mental, emotional tangle of characters, but I wanted also to find something that would maybe rise above all of that. Um, and something happened. There was something that, and actually I wrote about this and it's just out today in this PB, the Paper Brigade. There's an essay that I wrote about how I came to learn about the counting of the Omer. But there was a kind act that happened to me and my son. And I won't get into that now. Maybe you all can just go read the essay. Um,
That link has just been dropped into the
oh,
chat,
that's
so
very
open that
kind.
in a
That's
new
very
tab
kind.
for
Thank you so
later.
much. Okay. Um, so, because it goes on, but I was so moved by this kindness of a young man and the connection that he made with our son, who was also in his 20s, these two young men. I was just so moved by this kind act. Um, and it had to do about them sharing a vulnerable moment. They had both been struggling with some mental health issues. And, my son is okay with this. I cleared it with him before I wrote this essay. He's older now. And I was telling my friend about it, a writer. We go on our walks. She's a writer, Risa Miller, who's an Orthodox Jew. And she said, "Oh, that kind of thing strikes me as something that has to do with the counting the Omer." And I said, "What is that?" I hadn't heard of it. And she described, that infuses and delves into Kabbalistic themes of loving kindness and uh, beauty and endurance and charity and humility. And I just was intrigued. And when she was talking to me about that, and I found out it was every spring, um, and there was a certain time factor. It was 49 days, 7 weeks, and I thought, gosh, this might be this piece that I was searching for and didn't know what it was. I mean, and when I get that way about my novels, and I'm in a draft and I don't have the answer, I will sometimes just say to myself, have faith, put it out there, and kind of believe that the universe will deliver the answer. And so that's kind of how I felt when I was walking with my friend Risa. And so after my walk, I ran to the Jewish bookstore, which is in our town, and got some books on the counting of the Omer. And I was reading through them, and I just thought this is a perfect construct that will just sort of drop in very well to my novel. And it was a way to tie all the different characters together. The two families are neighbors, so they live next door to each other. But I wanted to see if I could explore this practice of self-reflection, um, and how it would manifest itself in different ways for these different characters. Because we have older women, we have a teenager, I have the cranky old, I call him the educator. I was wondering and curious myself to see what would happen if they all adopted or became involved with this practice. And then finally, I'll just say that I think I was intrigued too by the idea of counting, that each day, and the counting is you count each day. So, today is day one of week one, and then today's day two of week one. And you do that whole counting sequence for 49 days, which is very simple on some level. Um, and each week and day they have themes. But I was thinking how we all count our days. Oh, it's only 3 days until vacation. It's 5 days until the weekend. We're constantly counting these things in our lives. And I was intrigued by that as well.
And the title of the book, Evening Begins the Day, that is sort of, that comes from this. And one of the characters sort of says, why do we say that? Why does evening begin the day? So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that inspiration and where that comes from.
Well, another task that I set out for myself in this novel, I am attracted to dark things. I thought I want to delve into the darkness, but I want to see if I can get to the light in this novel. So that was sort of my challenge to myself. And, again, with this Jewish theme, I'd always was puzzled why the Jewish day started. When we started our holidays, it was always at sunset. And so I just started thinking about that too, why we start a day when the sun is setting in the evening. And so I thought, again, there's that the light comes after the darkness. And there is a biblical reference to, which I didn't know at the time. But I just was intrigued by that sense of a cycle, and that it's all connected, and that light does come out of darkness. And that's how I came to that. And it fit. I thought it fit the journeys that each of my characters were taking.
It made me think, I don't know if is it a Charles Reznikoff poem? It's a very short poem about a guy who has an office job, and he comes home from the office job. He's a poet, and he doesn't have the energy to write poetry, and he kind of waits for a bit. And then the energy comes back to him. And the poem ends with the line something like, truly, the tide comes in twice a day.
Mm.
I think it's Reznikov. I'm not sure. Anyways, it made, when I read I've just started your book, which I'm loving. I just got it a few days ago, but the title made me think of that truly the tide comes in twice a day.
Mm.
And Ben, the title of your book has that Green Day song in my head all the time. So tell us what the rest of our. This is I kept singing it, and it was on the book was on my bed, on my bedside table. And every time I walked into my room, I'd get the Green Day song on holiday, and I couldn't figure it out. And finally, I made the connection, and I was like, "Wow, my brain is doing something." But tell us a little bit about Tom and what he's going through, and we can go to the Jewish stuff right away. He's not Jewish. His wife is. She actually, it's at synagogue where she Zach Gursky, who is the sort of the guy she has an affair with, where that all happens. And there's sort of a lot of layeredness to her Jewish identity and the family's Jewish identity as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I was raised Jewish. I was bar mitzvahed, but my mother isn't Jewish. And so actually I like writing about half Jewish characters, because half still seems like quite a lot to me. And in this case, Tom is not Jewish, but he is very attracted to Amy's, I want to say culture, but it's broader than religious culture. His sense that her family has figured out some things about how to live a gracious life that he feels in his more working class background that he didn't have access to. But of course, that feeling also makes him an outsider, which is one of the problems in his marriage. And he doesn't share his wife's Jewish identity. So it's a part of her life that he feels excluded from. And it doesn't get better when she has an affair with a guy at the synagogue.
There's a sentence in your book where you write, sometimes just your presence as a slightly sadder, older guy changes the dynamic. And that is sort of what he's going through, this idea of sort of being somewhat invisible in his own life, being sort of very accommodating, but trying to find himself, going out on this journey and sort of wondering, like, it's sort of imposing along the way on every stop he goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you describe the books as being about what happens when your life does a 180, because obviously that is true of my book. But the feeling that I really wanted to capture in Tom's character was the sense he had that he'd reached a point in his life when he just wants to get through unscathed. He doesn't want to, he's aware that as a successful, at this point, upper middle class white man, um, he's had lots of luck that he probably didn't deserve, and that his position in the culture is different from the one that he grew up with. And he doesn't want to fight any of that. He's not disagreeing with it, but he realizes at some point that he's been living just not to get into trouble. And that's obviously no way to live. And so one of the things that I wanted to do in the book is to scathe him, to get him into trouble so that he was forced to take some stands that he'd been unwilling to take. And that was also, I think, one of the starting points for the problems in their marriage, the sense he had that he'd done nothing wrong and that his wife had. And you obviously can't maintain a relationship if those are the roles, where you're the guy who doesn't screw up and she's the one who does. And so one of the things I wanted to do in the book is, make him screw up a little bit and see where that led him.
You also put him through a lot physically. We sort of are aware of some, sort of his worsening health. And I was really, really moved by a piece you wrote in the New York Times about how your own physical illness sort of is something you ended up mapping onto your character. And so I was hoping to hear a little bit about, what he's going through physically and how your own journey of dealing with your health sort of imbued this novel with a lot more gravitas and more gravity, I would say, and how that process went for you as a person, as a writer, in all those ways.
Yeah, I mean, when I started the novel, I had some symptoms that I couldn't understand, and my doctor couldn't figure them out either. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to give them to this character? And then, of course, as the book went on, as I continued to write it, I got sicker and sicker. It didn't seem that interesting anymore. It just seemed bad. And by the time I finished the first draft, I was going through chemo. But it really did change the writing of the book. I wanted to make it, I always wanted the marriage to seem loving, even though it begins with an affair and the premise is some guy running away from his wife. But he thinks a lot about her and what went wrong as he runs away from her. But when I got sick, so many people were kind to me and put you at the center of their attention. And since the book began with a guy feeling like he had been pushed away from the center of the attention of the people around him, I couldn't finish it where I'd originally intended to. I had to take into account the fact that when these things that matter happen to you, the feelings that matter rise to the surface. And that seemed an interesting thing to write about too.
May I ask? Oh, sorry. You go, Jessica.
No, I was just curious. Did you ever have a feeling that when you're writing that you're predicting something, and so you change your path because you don't want to go, somehow your intuition is sensing something? I mean, that's a very powerful thing that you suddenly were ill. And
That's a good question. And the truth is, I like a lot of people and a lot of people who have been sick, I know that you had
I had my own illness, yeah.
you had your own illness to deal with. You start you develop superstitions because you feel like you have no control over these things that are happening inside your body. But I don't know if this happened to you. One of the things that struck me is actually when I did have a diagnosis, the superstitions went away. It just seemed to me that something medical was going on and that there was no magical thinking involved. It was just science and medical physics doing its work inside my body. So I became a little less superstitious about writing about it. I don't know. How did it strike you?
Well, I learned about how I got my illness. I had aplascanemia when I was in my 20s. So that was like 40 years ago, whatever, 40. I didn't learn how I got it until about 20 years later. So I think my superstition and all the magical thinking continued for a
It
very long
continued.
time,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
sense of, what caused it, and because it was a mystery what had caused it. And then I learned about it maybe 20 years ago, and then suddenly, oh, it just, maybe that feeling of poof, just
Was it emotional to learn about it?
yeah, it was, because I had invested a lot of years in some ways, you could say, of not knowing, and then suddenly to actually know, it just reframed everything. It changed the dynamic, and I had to relook at things again. Um,
I don't know if you felt this. I mean, yours was longer ago than mine, but one of the things that struck me when I was sick and in recovering from it, and this was a kind of benefit. I don't want to say that the whole thing was a good experience because obviously it wasn't, but it was a kind of benefit that I felt like I had a kind of instant access to certain emotions
mm,
that the sickness had formed these pathways, and the emotions like love for people that I loved, or a response to flowers coming up in spring, that kind of thing. Do you feel like
mhm.
you still have that access because of the
Oh,
sickness?
absolutely, without
Yeah,
question. It completely changed me in that regard, and I feel very aware of all of that, and that's I'm grateful for it. That was a gift, thankfully, that I've been able to live with for a long time now. Um, so it's different. I had it when I was younger. You had it when you were older. So I don't know if
yeah,
that there's a little bit of a change there too, because it was more formative for me in terms of my
yeah.
identity, I think. Um,
And
but
it
yeah,
was also
um,
probably more unusual at your age at the time to have to go through
mhm.
this stuff. Whereas one of the things,
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, as soon as you go into a hospital, you realize how common. I mean, not saying that what you had was common, but if you're going through chemo, you're in a room full of people going through chemo. It seems more like the human condition. And in my case, at least, less something that was happening just to me. It's just something that people have to live with.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to a clinic where it was, where people were getting things that were very rare. So I can't say it felt universal or
Yeah.
common at that point. Um, but it's changed over time too because of the treatments and how people view and look at um, potentially fatal illnesses and how we talk about it's changed, you know, in the last many decades now.
Ben, there's a beautiful few sentences from your New York Times piece, if you don't mind. I just wanted to
I'll go
share
for it.
them
Yeah.
with the group. You wrote, so I started working a little, 10 minutes in the morning or more if I could stand it. My sickness also changed the book. That sense of middle-aged drift I began with had been replaced by something else. Every ordinary thing I did now had a purpose. The stakes were always high. This is what you want from a certain kind of realism. And the sicker I became, the more I felt at the center of something, of attention and love. I wanted to include that feeling in the novel. And
Mm,
I really do think that's something that's so beautiful. We have, Tom feels so lost. He's running from something, he's running from his symptoms. And then at the I don't want to spoil anything, but by the end, he sort of there's like a sense of closure once he figures out what's happening with him physically, that then brings the family together in this unusual, unexpected way that does feel very true to life, which is, these challenging moments. I mean, that sort of Jessica, in your book too, like at these challenging moments, we find community in
mhm.
unexpected ways, whether that's in sort of the room of people getting chemotherapy, Ben, as you mentioned, or if that's two families sort of going through something really, really raw at the same time, next to each other and going and counting the omer together. I think there's something really beautiful to that.
Yeah, I think that's true about traumas or any some kind of extreme experience that you have. It thrusts you into a different place, and I think there's you can have different reactions. You can reach for community or you can isolate. People do have those the danger of isolating. I mean, that danger is there, and I think it's common. So I guess that was something else I was trying to address um, in my novel too, which I think was
I
in
feel like
yours too, Ben.
there are a lot of annoying things about being a writer. There are a lot of nice things too. But one of the consolations is that if anything happens to you, some part of you just thinks it's interesting. And I think also that's actually one of the consolations of being a human being. Some part of you, sometimes a very small part, whatever is going on in your life, just thinks, oh, that's interesting. Um, and at the end of the book, part of what I wanted to get at was Tom's feeling that Amy had the affair, among many other reasons, because she felt that her life hadn't turned out exactly the way that she had wanted it to. She was a teacher, but then there was like an incident at school that made her not really want to continue teaching. And then she married a guy who was making a lot of money, so she felt a little less pressure to make money herself, but that caused its own problems. And then you have kids, and the kids grow older and they don't need you in the same way. And she had a personality that was based on the fact that she was loved and kind. And she no longer had the outlets for that personality that she had once had, except when he gets sick. She has another outlet for it. I'm not saying that if I had to write a sequel, that in itself couldn't become a part of the problem, because in the same way that you can't base a marriage on one person being right and one person being wrong, I don't think you want to base any kind of relationship on somebody being needed and somebody being generous. But at least at the moment, there's a balance that has been restored.
That's a really interesting idea, and it's I was going to sort of pull the twist on the two of you, which is like these books actually, as much as it is about like your life doing a 180, it's actually like the expanse of time in which change happens, right? We see our characters change, their families, their kids. And so, yes, there's the moment of finding out about the affair, or yes, the moment of getting the diagnosis. But what we actually see is sort of like the slow build of so many different relationships. And the affair is sort of just like the tipping point into or sort of the opening salvo into sort of, or whatever the right phrase is for what's actually been going on in all of these people's lives, and sort of like the rippling effects. And so I'm interested, Jessica, for you, this idea of counting the Omer, these 49 days, it's the perfect way to stretch out time in such a slow and intentional way that really does show us that like none of this stuff happened, not to excuse anyone of their behavior, but like all of these things that are going on in all these families, nothing is happening overnight. It's all just going and going and going, and these decisions we make and this and that. And I'm curious a little bit more about that from you.
Well, I think that, again, one of the things I'm interested in is what we all walk around with and what we're carrying for sometimes years. And, that's bubbling beneath the surface, or like Ben was saying, he had a character that was just sort of trying to live unscathed. And I think so many of us try to do that. We're always, whether it's how your child is doing in school, or how you're doing in your career, um, or how you're doing in your marriage. There's certain societal constructs, and then at what point does it bubble up enough to disrupt all of that and cause you to make some kind of change or adjustment, or reframe. Um and so I think the counting the Omer was also for me a way, as I said before, to look at lives on a level that sort of rises above, the grind. Is there something that's larger for all of us that maybe is not definable, but that connects us all in a way that's universal, no matter how it looks. We all, our troubles look differently to each other, and we hide them differently, but are we all not really struggling with some very common um, problems and feelings? So the counting and that exercise of just stopping, taking a moment in the day, which technically you count the day in the evening when the sun is going down, and whatever the theme is, if it's loving kindness, and you're talking about loving kindness and, let's say, justice, or what does beauty look like in loving kindness? What does humility look like with folded into loving kindness? There are nuances to all of these things, and you start to, if you take a moment to think, well, how does that look in my day today? Or how did I not do that today? Or how was I not loving? Or how was I not, humble? Or how was I humble? Just it sort of raises some kind of awareness, and I think gives some kind of honor and value to your daily life, and to those small moments that we all basically are living, because that is our life. Those small moments are what we live every day.
And Tom, for you, it's almost like when all of the normal pieces of Tom's life go out the window, right? He's sort of on sabbatical a little bit.
Yeah.
He's turned his phone off on this drive, like these stepping out of the daily, the sort of all the things that happen day to day to keep you from connecting with different people in your life. Like the people he sees on this trip are just people he has not been in touch with. He's sort of opts out of this grind that he's been in for very many years. And I'm curious how sort of like you think about time in this way, in your work, and in life.
I mean, it's definitely one of the joys of the road trip, isn't it? That your house becomes a car. You're like a turtle, and you move with your house. And I've always been slightly obsessed with the idea of having a wardrobe, the simplest possible wardrobe or set of clothes and shoes that you could wear for any occasion. So if you only had one pair of shoes, one pair of trousers, and you had to be able to go to a funeral, a football game, go jogging, play basketball, go to a medical emergency, what could you take with you? In practice, what that means is I have 18 different pairs of almost identical shoes for slightly different variations on this occasion. But I think part of the appeal of the road trip is this feeling that you have. You get in the car, you could start your life again anywhere, and you pass through a town and you think, who would I be if I lived here? For me, one of the centers of the book was a scene when he meets up with his ex-girlfriend, his girlfriend from college, and they go out to dinner together, and she has a young daughter. And he starts to feel this horror that if for whatever reason he ended up with her again, if his marriage was over and he started again, it's not that he would be miserable, but the idea that you can change yourself so completely struck him as somehow awful and frightening, that he could have a similar relationship to some kid he'd never met before that his own children had to him. And so part of what he feels, in addition to this desire to go through unscathed, is just the horror of the human capacity to change. I'm not sure where that leaves him, because obviously he has to change a little bit, but it seems reasonable to be a bit scared of it too.
I think terrified. I think people are terrified of change.
Not to change gears here.
Yeah, go on.
No, I know. I think that's it's fascinating. I also want to say that these books are like very fun to read, even though there are like dark moments and sort of dark, or sort of challenging, not challenging subject matter, but just sort of these people are at inflection points in their lives, right? They're going through really challenging things and they're trying to figure out, I guess, the same thing, that this idea of like how to be human and how to grow from the sort of harder things in life.
And you have to do it, Jessica, you have to do it with lots of different characters from different points of view. You've
Yeah.
quadrupled
Yeah.
your task. How was that?
It was different. I mean, I have not done that before, to have these four different main points of view. Um, but on the other hand, it was sort of fun because, well, I mean, I have one guy who's just a cranky older, what I call him the educator, and I just had so much fun writing him, despite his misery. I know that sounds awful, but it was just interesting to me to try to go inside his skin and understand how he might be viewing the world, which felt like such a different world than my world. But I think I enjoyed getting the different perspectives. It was almost a relief, I think, to
Mm-hmm.
see things from a different points of view, from a teenager's point of view, from the woman Rachel, who has no children but has been married for 27 years, and finds out about her husband's emotional affair. And then the other marriage, which, they're in their sort of their 40s and they're still sort of ambitious and, career minded and all that. Um, my character Cynthia, she dresses in heels and fancy clothes and all kinds of ways that I don't. So I had fun with that as well. Sometimes just not getting outside of myself, I guess you could say. I
I
don't know
was
if you
I
also
ever feel
do.
stuck.
that way. When you're writing your characters.
Sorry, what is?
If you ever feel that way when you're writing characters that feel so different than yourself, or
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, in this case, the other characters are all seen through Tom's eyes,
hmm
but dialogue forces you into it anyway, right? As soon as you have a
yeah.
character talk, you have to
hmm
inhabit other people's skins, but you can do
hmm
it in smaller doses. I sometimes feel, the old Superman movies,
Yeah.
and I forget which one. There's the kind of there's the dumb, incompetent but brutishly strong anti-hero villain guy. Do you know the one I mean?
I don't know if I know these specific
There's
ones.
Zod. I can't remember which Superman it is it's the one with Zod in it, and there are these three siblings who have come from planet Krypton. They're going to destroy the world and take over Superman. I'm sure I'm getting it hopelessly wrong, but they have superpowers too, like X-ray vision.
Mm,
Except for this one brother, um, who can only, if he concentrates incredibly hard, can get a little beam of X-ray vision 6 inches from his eyes. And that's what it always feels like to me when I'm trying to do some other character. Like if I really work hard, I can get a glimpse of maybe a little bit what it might be like to be somebody else.
mm,
But most of the time, I'm just conscious of my totally inadequate knowledge of the world and other people. So I try to hide it as much as possible.
And that does not come through in your writing. I feel like there's a real grasp of people and all the different layers. And Jessica, what I love about the educator is like we get like he's getting the calls from the parents, and we've all sort of like been on different sides of that, right? Where you're like,
mm,
he's just like, oh, he's just trying to get this kid through the end of the year to grad, right? Like to sort of be like have his hands clean. And I think the idea of like the school year too is sort of this thing that we have. We see the
mhm,
kids, we see the parents, we have the really charismatic teacher who's sort of,
mhm,
in the mix as well. But in many ways, it all comes back to sort of like everyone's just trying to like do the thing they're supposed to do to like make
mhm,
things work. And that's sort of
mhm,
like what we're all doing in like day in and day out, right? Just sort of like trying to do our piece and hoping that the other pieces fall into place. And then as we see, like it didn't, right? We have the dad
mhm,
who's feels very failed by the school, and the school who sort of feels like this is not our problem necessarily.
mhm. Yeah, I do think that I was striving to have the characters to puncture that facade to get to some place where they could feel a moment of authenticity in their life, because that's where I think the freedom is, liberation is. Um, and I was interested again. The counting of the Omer begins on the second day of Passover, which of course is when the Jews are fleeing slavery. They're enslaved and then they're outcast into the desert, and then it ends um, when Moses is bringing down the word of God. Shavuot is sort of it's bookended by that, and I was also intrigued by that concept that our traumas, that you don't escape um, slavery overnight. Just because you walk out the door doesn't mean you're suddenly free. There's a shedding, and it's a process. It takes time. And so for all of the characters, there is a sort of point of puncturing where there's that disruption, but it's not like, oh, okay, la di da, I figured it out now that I've had this, this pivot point in my life. It takes a while. So I was interested in that as well. But the educator who's a cranky guy, I really thought I wasn't going to like him. I mean, I thought in the beginning this is someone but I really ended up feeling a special affection for him. I think I have an affection for cranky old guys. Probably has to do with my dad, who was um, cantankerous to say the least.
We have a lot of really good questions coming in, so I just want to switch over to them so we can make sure we get to all of them. Someone is asking how each of you landed on this idea of betrayal, which sort of came up early in our conversation, particularly in the intimate context of family life. That comes from Nina.
Ben, you want to go
Jessica.
first? um, I just think betrayal is one of the worst, hardest things to heal from, and I was also interested. This emotional affair is sort of something that's common or more common right now with social media, and the lines are more blurred, I think. And in friendships, where we are, the boundaries again can be blurred and you can feel betrayed in a friendship, and I just think that kind of wound um, is painful, and I wanted to explore that because it's not. I think the sexual one is more obvious, I guess. But again, I was interested in those emotional, the emotional pain of things that are harder to grasp, or maybe even harder to define, but are very wounding and sometimes very hard to overcome. So, um, that's what I wanted to explore, and then I just found out a lot of different ways to explore it, I guess.
In my case, the honest truth is I don't know. The opening line of the book occurred to me, and so I sat down and wrote it, and then wrote more or less the rest of the opening 2.5 pages. And afterward came back to see what I had done. I suppose in my case, the betrayal itself, the infidelity, was in some ways less important than the sense that he had as he was getting older, that his picture of his wife after years of marriage was just kind of accurate. And the betrayal was part of that, but all the other things that had happened to him was part of it. And I don't know if this happens to you, but I'm curious about what making friends as you get older looks like, because you're probably a little quicker than you used to be to feel like you've heard. How do I want to put this? You've seen the various personality types before. You know what they're like. You know what their opinions are going to look like. And that sense you have when you're in your 20s and you meet somebody you've never met before for the first time. And it's so exciting to get a sense of the world that they come from and the culture that they might have grown up with. And then as you get older, especially with the people that you know well, they become a little bit more predictable, and how to fight that sense of their predictability.
So your question is that what are you asking in particular?
Whether that seems too true to you, that one of the things that as you get older that you can struggle with is the feeling that
I would say that
your friends are a little less surprising than they used to be.
mm, um I'm not sure I feel that way. I think it takes me longer to figure out who people are. So I would say that it probably just um I'm not sure I feel that way. I mean there's there's a feeling I have very old friends and I know them. But and maybe this is just why I'm always writing about emotional relationships, because it takes me forever to figure them out, and I'm curious about them, and they haunt me, and I haven't figured it out. So that's the mystery for me. But um, I, no, I can't say I really have that feeling.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
so anyway, the betrayal mattered less to their marriage, I think, than the sense that he had that by this point in their marriage, they've taken each other's measure. And obviously part of the book is the hope of the book is that they realize they're more surprising than they thought they were.
Well,
it's
yeah.
interesting. We have another question that sort of says, is it fair to say that each book is in some ways about vulnerability,
Hmm.
which is sort of another way of thinking about it, it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Ben,
I
you're
mean,
thinking
Ben,
no.
No, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely. I mean, he definitely makes himself more and more vulnerable as the book goes on. He's getting sicker and sicker, and in his relations with his kids. I mean, I haven't talked about that much, but the book starts with his really close friendship with his daughter, he's dropping off at university, and ends with the time he spends with his son, who's older, with whom he has a slightly more difficult relationship. But then the son sees him collapsing in hospital, and that difficult relationship goes away to some extent because the simpler relationship comes to the surface. So yes, and I mean, I think in Tom's case, part of what happens in the course of the novel is he becomes more and more vulnerable.
Someone has a
Yeah.
specific question for you, Ben, who Alyssa wants to know, why Scarsdale? Why is this book? Why are our main characters, why do they live in Scarsdale? And I also feel like the question of like the city, New York City, and the people who live there versus like, will they move there? I think that sort of is
Mm.
almost like a counterpoint or a foil to this idea of them living in Scarsdale.
Go on. What do you mean?
Are they going to move there? When his wife is sending him text messages to like an apartment listing, is
Right.
it like
Going.
our
Yes.
kids are
Yes.
gone? Yeah. And like what it, I know what it means about success and, the house and the, um, I actually now I'm thinking, Jessica, in your book, like the renovations one does to one's home, sort of like this idea of home as sort of a construct in both of these books as sort of like symbolizing something about family stability, stagnancy, maybe, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it seemed like if you're successful and have some money, it's a sort of sensible place where you can raise a family, um, even if you want to kick out against it occasionally. I suppose that was why Scarsdale for Tom and Amy. I mean, specifically, also they moved to the city after she has this bad experience. They moved to Scarsdale after she has this painful experience at the school where she's teaching in Manhattan, and she just wants to get away from it all.
So Jessica, we have a few questions for you. Someone says, just finished reading and love your book. Do you think the introduction of Omer is more accepted as a spiritual tool now, as people are hungrier for a deeper mystical approach, given what is going on collectively and personally for Jews? And then someone else wants to know, have you yourself counted the Omer?
Love those questions. I think maybe I'm representing something that other people are feeling. Some need this feeling of collectiveness or wanting to be connected. So I hope that it might open up that feeling for people out there. Again, I didn't know about it, so I learned about it by writing this book, and I feel that I have a lot more to learn about it. But in the process, one of the things I did was I did join not every night, uh, accounting of the Omer session on Zoom with a rabbi, and I just found it so moving. It was just 30 minutes where the rabbi and some of the people would say a prayer, and then we would sort of talk about the theme of the day, and people just shared. It was sort of a sharing kind of thing. Um, what I did find was sometimes I set out to count it every day, and then some days I actually forgot. And that surprised me. It seemed like such a simple thing. And it just told me again how distracted we are. Um, that I didn't remember to do it that night, you know. So I'm going to try again. It's coming up. I think it starts on the April 2nd. So I'm going to
We
try
could
it so
all
I
do it
can actually
together, I
do it.
think.
We could all do it
Everyone
together.
here.
That would be, I'm going to try to do it because I learned really cool stuff, the things that people shared. And they can just be small moments from the day that, will touch something in yourself. And it just felt very special. So I'm kind of glad I discovered it, and I feel that it's something that anybody can do. And I like that too.
It's also a great literary device, right?
Well,
It like
I
sets the
I
book up
didn't know
really
it until
well.
I had no idea until I started, but it's worked out because there's a flexibility about it, which is nice.
Ben, we have a few questions here about our character's illness and how long it goes on and whether there was sort of some avoidance there going on. And then an internist who's writing in who's hoping that you did not have to wait as long to get a diagnosis or treatment. And then I'm going to add to that, how did how did your religious beliefs impact your attitude towards your own illness and then your writing? So really going deep, if you don't mind.
So the first one is it did take me a long time to get a diagnosis. And actually, there were some reviews of the book that thought that Tom's inability to get a diagnosis was typical middle-aged male behavior and
Mm.
unwillingness to confront the things that are going wrong in his life. And in
It's
fact,
almost like they just want to let things go. What did we say at the beginning? He just wants everything to stay the
yeah,
same.
and it turned out that what I had was hard to find.
Mm.
Um, so I don't totally blame Tom. I was a little more proactive than he was. Also, my wife was amazing, and it felt like there was an alarm clock going that we couldn't turn off the whole time.
Mm.
And we kept on going to the doctor to find out what was wrong. I actually got discharged by my GP because he couldn't discover anything that I had.
Mm.
Um, so yes, it did take me a while. And I think the second question was what my religious feeling.
How your sort of religious identity or practice played into that, and then also in like the writing of it.
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer. I mean, the real truth is I was raised, I guess, a cultural Jew, um, but it did play a big part in the sense that many of the writers I started admiring when I was in my 20s and reading a lot were Jewish American writers. And part of the reason I was so interested in them is because I felt that they gave me an access to my dad's childhood. Uh,
Mm.
And my Jewishness was always, because I went to schools in Austin, Texas. I was often the only Jewish kid in my class. And so it was less about community. It was really more for me a sense of my father's life, which is why it meant so much to me rather than the community I was in.
Wow. That's
Um,
different from what
yeah.
I grew up in because I grew up in Newton, which was, they called it Jewton. Sometimes it was just totally different. So when I went to Montana on a cross-country trip, and we were at a campground, and the people there had never met a Jew, and I had never had that experience before. So it's really fascinating how what you said about your childhood.
And along those lines, too, someone raises an interesting question, asking you, Ben, to talk a little bit more about the idea of Tom being an outsider because he doesn't share his wife's religion, and how this might be something that's universal with marriages that are mixed in quotes in any way. It just disappeared before I asked, but like culturally, racially, socioeconomically, this idea of like, will you ever sort of the other the sort of in-laws, that relationship, and then sort of just the two people with each other.
That's really interesting. I don't know if it's always true. I guess it can be it can be true. It's also true a lot of marriages that aren't mixed, that you come from different worlds, and that you always have access to this other world, which can be great, but also part of the problem. I get it. In my own childhood, I would actually say that it had the reverse effect. My dad was a Jewish kid from New York. My mom was from Germany, and to some extent, when they got married, they were both cut off from their families. In my mother's case, because it was so far away from home at a time when travel was expensive and difficult. And in my dad's case, because his family was really upset that he had married my mom. I mean, they reconciled eventually. But what it meant was that we grew up on a kind of island in Austin of nuclear family. And so instead of, in my parents' case, seeming like a sort of a feature of the marriage that kept them apart from each other, in our case, it was what made our nuclear family so close.
Mm.
There were also a lot of
Someone
us.
wants.
We
Oh,
had
sorry.
I'm one of five, so we had a whole basketball team of
Oh,
kids that
wow.
we could
Hmm.
play with.
And then you really did go on to play basketball,
I
which is
was,
good, right?
well, because I realized I could beat my siblings at it. I thought if this is one thing I get to win at in childhood, I better keep doing it as long as possible. And then it turned out it was no good, so I had to quit that and try to become a writer.
But you went pretty far with it, didn't you?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I went. The truth is, after
Tell the
college, I did.
people, they need to know.
Okay, so after college, I didn't want to get a normal job, and I didn't want to go to grad school, and I got a job playing second division basketball in Germany, where it turned out I sucked. So I didn't last very long. But the most exciting part of it was I got to play against an 18-year-old kid named Dirk Nowitzki, who went on to become pretty good. So I can say proudly that I got dunked on by Dirk.
We have someone here who wants us to know that Google has a Counting the Omer app, which is great. And
Oh
then
my
someone wants
goodness.
Jessica for you to give us the name of the rabbi or program that you used to count the Omer. Sounds like we're counting it, guys. Ben, I don't know if you signed up for this when you agreed to join this
Yeah,
chat, but
I'm all in.
we are here
I'll,
in it
I'll,
for
I'll
many
I'll get the
weeks.
I'll share it with you. I don't have it on hand right now. I have to go hunt it up, so I'll be happy to share it with you.
And I'd love to end on a question that I feel like authors don't like, and someone acknowledges this in the question. Caroline says, I would love to know, and I know that sometimes authors don't like to talk about this. If you can say anything about your next projects." Caroline asked it, not me.
Jessica, you want to?
Yeah, I can tell you because I have written a draft, and I am going to write about my illness after all these years. So it
Was that
was
hard?
Uh, no, I guess I was ready because I've been hauling around the journals that I kept during that time, uh, for 40 years. And so I
Yeah.
have my own archives, and I just pulled them out, all the journals, and they were very specific and detailed. And that was so helpful. So I'm not writing it as a novel. I mean, I'm calling it a visitation, but it's, memoirish. Um, but it just sort of poured out because maybe I was ready. And what happened,
Yeah.
well, I guess I'll say that's all I'll say. I'll let you go because our time is up. So, how about you, Ben?
I've got a novel coming out in next April called
Oh,
Starting
cool.
Out.
Oh,
It's a
wow.
story of a marriage from the woman's point of view.
Ah,
I love that. That's amazing.
Right.
I mean, I like that because this conversation is called "Is this the beginning or the end?" That was sort of the headline for tonight. But so it sounds like this is the only the beginning. We're going to count the Omer. We'll be back for your next books. And it's been a real privilege to talk with you, Ben and Jessica. Your books are fabulous. They're right here. You can get them in the links in the chat, and you can get them through the Jewish Book Council. And next month, I want to invite everyone to come to the Jewish Museum for our next conversation. But until then, I'm so grateful to the two of you, London, Brookline, for being here with us tonight. And I have to say, people in the chat, they're loving it.
Oh, well, what a pleasure.
It's been total pleasure. Thank you,
so
Stephanie.
much.
Nice to meet you. Lovely to meet
Yeah.
you, Jessica.
Yeah, really great to meet you too, Ben. And
We'll see you back here for the Omer.
Okay, sounds great.
Night one.
I'm going to bed now.
Okay, good night. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Stephanie.